For our next session, ladies and gentlemen, climate waits for no one. And following on from what Grant said, we have just had the warmest June, July we've ever known in New Zealand. I'm thinking the recent floods on the west coast that wrecked Westport, those devastating floods in Canterbury, and then in Europe, the flooding in Belgium and Germany, and the height of summer. So let's go to Europe to start our session, and via Zoom, bring in the Right Honourable Lord Deben, who set up and now runs Sancroft, a corporate responsibility consultancy. Lord Deben, good morning from New Zealand. Good evening to you. What do you have for us today?
Well, good morning, and I'm very pleased. I'm here in the evening. I've just finished my supper, and I'm very pleased to be with you in New Zealand. I'm sorry not to be with you in person. My wife and I were with you 4 years ago, and we were extremely well welcomed. And I've been virtually with you on a whole range of occasions since then. And I must start by congratulating the horticultural industry in New Zealand for rising to the range of challenges which have faced them, not least COVID, of course, but also the increasing irrationality of the weather. And I really want to start with that. The truth is that climate change is a bad phrase because it isn't the change from one sort of climate to another. It's the change from a climate which you have some idea about to one which is constantly interrupted by extreme weather. I mean, you mentioned what was happening in the rest of Europe, but here in Britain, more rain fell on St. James's Park in 2 hours than had ever fallen on a month before. I happen to know that because where we live in London, although I'm speaking from where we are in the country, which is our real home, where we live in London is just off St. James's Park. And the houses on the other side of the road had their live-in basements filled with water and sewage. And that's what's happening all over Europe at this moment because of the problem of water. And the reason we know perfectly well why it is that with warming periods, there is more water held in the clouds, and it comes down in a wholly different way. When I was a child, we used to talk about sweet, refreshing showers. We don't have those anymore. We have torrential downpours all at once. And we're all having to come to terms with that in Britain, in the rest of Europe, and in the whole world. And I know that in New Zealand, a country which suffers from occasional disruptive and sometimes really disruptive situations from of course, from earthquakes to storms, you've begun to realize that this is going to be, certainly on the storm front, an increasingly important part of the way in which you try to produce. Now, I was Minister of Agriculture and Horticulture here in the United Kingdom, Deputy for a bit, and then Minister for a period of 7 years. And I therefore know a good deal about what you do because I had to know that as Minister in dealing with our relationships with New Zealand. And now, of course, I have a small farm and I grow my own vegetables and I know exactly what the problem is. At this moment, I'm trying to decide whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not. If it doesn't rain tomorrow, then it hasn't rained properly here for nearly 3 weeks. And that's never happened before. So the issues that you have are ones which are very close to my heart. So when I say what I'm about to say, don't think that I'm saying it with any kind of cheer or pleasure. I'm the independent chairman of the Climate Change Committee, which advises Parliament in Britain and therefore the government on how it should proceed. I'm independent in the sense that I'm chosen by the minister responsible for climate change, which when I was appointed was a Liberal Democrat. by the First Minister of Scotland, a Scottish nationalist, First Minister of Wales, a socialist, and the First Minister of the North of Ireland, a Protestant unionist. So they got a conservative Catholic, and that shows just how independent one can be. And I would love to be able to say to you that climate change isn't happening, or it's not as bad as we thought, or all the rest of it. I can't. The science which we work on, my team of experts, the leading experts on climate and on the economy, who form my committee of the senior people, and then I have a very significant team of scientists who work for us. They have to tell me that this is real, that it is going to go on, that it will get worse, and that unless we take serious steps now, we are going to find ourselves in a world which is increasingly not possible for human beings to live in. Now, that's the fact. We have all arguments about how much one would like to avoid the facts, but those are the facts. So each of us, in whatever job we have, we really do have to decide how we're going to handle this. And I want to suggest to you three very simple things. First of all, the world has woken up to this. So when we have COP26 in Britain in November, it won't be as successful as I'd like it to be, because no conference ever is. But it will certainly move us on yet another step to the whole world reckoning that we have to work together to achieve our ends. Because this is a global threat and it has to have a global answer. Now, I've been a businessman all my life, except the 16 years I was a minister. And as a businessman, I know perfectly well that what you really want to do is to try to find what certainties you can find. And of course, in business, there are very few certainties. But the one certainty we do know is not just that climate change is happening, but the world is increasingly prepared to deal with it. And the more it happens, of course, the more countries which at the moment are not being fully supportive will become more supportive, because they will have a population which will say, as the German population said to its government with those floods only a fortnight ago. It was a remarkable moment, because these floods happened and there was none of the sort of moving round and thinking, and well, it might be this and it might, there was none of that. They said absolutely clearly, the media, the politicians, the public, this is climate change, and why has the government not done more to prepare us for it? And that's why I say to your government, which has been in general very good on this, stick to it and don't get pushed off it. Because if you once move from doing your best, you will in fact be blamed by the public. It's remarkable how the very people who told you not to put up taxes, not to have this or that particular regulation, are the first people to complain when climate change really affects them. So whether it's the present government or whether it's your previous national government, it just has to recognize that we have to act, because otherwise we'll be blamed, and actually we'll blame ourselves. Because unless we get this right, there won't be a world that is worth living in for our grandchildren. And that, of course, is, I'm afraid, absolutely true, and we therefore have to do our bit. Second thing to say is that climate change is the proof of what we have done wrong with the world. I commend to you the encyclical of Pope Francis. He wrote this now nearly 6 years ago, but in it there is more wisdom than I think in any document that I have ever read on climate change. And at the heart of it, he says one thing which cannot be missed. He says climate change is the symptom of what we have done to the world. And so when we're trying to deal with climate change, we have to recognize it's about biodiversity. It's about a proper use of our resources. It's about soil and the quality of soil. And it's about the products which we actually produce. I was so pleased to hear the introductory words, because there's no doubt that in New Zealand you have some of the best quality products that you could possibly have. But I do remember the anger which I had when somebody tried to pour out Evian water into my glass. You have the best water in the world. What on earth are you doing importing Evian or even San Pellegrino, which I like enormously? This is damaging because we don't make the right choices and we don't sell ourselves properly. In Britain, we have this 5-a-day policy, getting people to eat vegetables and fruit. One of the things that's most depressing is that the 5-a-day products are less good for us, much less good than they would have been 40 years ago, because of what we've done to the soil and because we haven't cared for what is basic to our future. So the second thing I want to say, after reminding you of the certainty, which is very good for business, the certainty of having to fight this battle. Second thing I want to say is, for goodness sake, make the most of the qualities that you've got in that battle. New Zealand is fortunate. You almost have zero cost of energy. And even in those circumstances, I remember the stupid decision to remove the electric buses and replace them with diesel. I argued strongly about it then. It was foolish because you've got to maximize your advantages. And only by doing that can you overcome the problems. And that's the third point. You're a nation which is really able to help the rest of the world. I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to people in New Zealand, but you see, you are unique. You have all the stability without much of the baggage of a Western country. So you don't have things to live down. You can lead. And above all, you can help to give a voice to all those countries in your quarter of the world for whom climate change is not just something you've got to deal with. It is disastrous and may well mean that you don't have a nation in 25 years' time. You can be the real voice. And being the real voice means that you have got to find many of the answers to the big problems that we have. Now, the horticultural industry, of course, has a huge opportunity to learn much more about how you deal with less water, how you deal with too much water at some times, how you deal with excess heat, how you deal with the world which we're going to have, even if we manage to keep the rise in temperature below 1.5 degrees. There's a lot that's going to change, even if we do our best and achieve the most. But in the wider agricultural world, you have another role, and it's a role which only New Zealand can take on. You have the role to help us to be able to keep animals without destroying the planet. We've got to find better ways of being able to produce meat, to have animals and arable land together. Because the only way that we'll keep our soil alive is the very traditional way of mixed farming. Now, that may be less important in New Zealand, the mixed bit, but in the rest of the world, it's crucial. And because you're a country which has all the intellectual rigor and ability to be able to achieve this, and the stability of a state, which is so important, you can help change the world. I am deeply opposed to vegans. I am very much in favor of vegetables, but I think human beings are omnivores. We're not made just to have plants. And although I eat more vegetables and more salads than most people do, and I grow all those in my garden, I care about it a lot. I'm sitting looking at half a dozen outdoor cucumbers, which are quite difficult to grow here, but of which I am very proud. But I've just picked them this afternoon. But I just say to you, we're not going to win this battle unless we make it possible for people to have good meat. And that means not masses of meat, it means less meat, but better meat. And having higher standards, better safety, and above all, better environmental safety is what we have to achieve. And there's one country in the world that can lead the world on that. And so I was sad to see the protests by some farmers in New Zealand against the policies of the government. I have no political connections with any of the parties in New Zealand, but I just say to you, this is a moment for your country to step up and lead the world. And if I may be naughty, show New Zealand to show Australia how it's done. You really do have a remarkable opportunity. And that's why I've had such joy in being invited to see you, to talk to you, to travel both islands, and now to spend a good deal of time virtually discussing these issues. New Zealand is not a distant place apart from the world. You could be the central nation which will help the world to deal with climate change, which, if we don't solve these problems, will overwhelm us, and that human beings must not allow.
Well, thank you, Lord Deben. I can suggest to you it is not naughty to suggest that we're showing Australia how it's done. We've been doing it forever. But fascinating insights. Enjoy those cucumbers. I do happen to know about that rain you spoke of at St James's Park because I have a son living in London, and he sent us footage of him wading through a park in South London, and to someone who is English born as I am, it was astonishing. But we thank you for what you have brought to this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Deben.
Thank you very much.